have with me a star who has worked on Broadway, film, television, and in the music industry, the one and only Lada St. Edmund. And Lada, I really appreciate you taking this time with us.
Oh, I'm happy to be with you.
Glad to have you on. You have had a remarkable career over the years, and I know the listeners are going to really enjoy hearing a little bit about you. And it's amazing what you're up to these days. But first, let's go back a little ways, back to your childhood. You're a Midwest girl.
No, that's not a little ways. That's a long way.
Minnesota, is that your home state?
Yeah, I was born in Minneapolis, a farm right outside of Minneapolis. Actually, right down the road from the Arnesses. Remember James Arness and, Gunsmoke, and Ronnie Anderson lived down there, too.
Is that right? As a matter of fact, James Arness has become a real good friend on this show, has been with us quite a few times.
Yeah, well, the whole family was very well respected in Minnesota.
Now, it was when you were still young, that's when the move to New York came. You moved to Manhattan, I understand.
I moved to Manhattan, where I was promptly thrown into ballet class because I was such a tomboy. There was great hopes that somehow that would straighten me out. And from there, I was a ballet dancer at the Met when I was 11. And then I did a lot of Broadway shows.
Yeah.
I did Bye Bye Birdie when I was 12. West Side Story when I was 14, Promises, things like that.
That's amazing. I wanted to get into that, your Broadway work. A lot of people might know you from Hullabaloo, but you started...
Hullabaloo was when I was in high school.
That's right, when you were quite a bit
girls.
older, but when you were young, it was Broadway.
Well, yeah, I was a what they call a working dancer, or what some people have heard of as gypsies. They used to call us gypsies because if you were really good and worked hard in one show, you were pretty much hired to the next show, to the next show, to the next show, So, as a matter of fact, the one of the lead dancers in West Side Story, David Winters, turned out to be the choreographer for Hullabaloo, and that's how I got that show.
That's how that connection came.
Yeah, it was, it's like pebbles in the pond, ripples, the
Absolutely.
ripple effect.
Well, you mentioned a couple of huge Broadway hits, Bye Bye Birdie and West Side Story, working, of course, on the wonderful Bye Bye Birdie. Of course, that later came to television. But Dick Van Dyke, I understand, was on the Broadway version as well.
Yep, it was his first show. It was just about everybody in its first show, except Cheetah Rivera, who was in West Side Story. Paul Lynde, it was his first show. We were all 12-year-old, 13-year-old kids. Actually, I went to professional children's school, so I never really had one of those high school reunions. But last week we had a reunion of the original cast of Bye Bye Birdie. And it was the 50th year, and it was that's not a reunion you want to tread lightly with. It was a shock, but everybody was still alive and kicking, and it was pretty odd. It was surreal, actually. 50 years is a long time, and it was really kind of a testament to, in those days, it was before, rock and roll and drugs and all that carrying on, and was almost in the very beginning of the 60s. And everybody kind of, survived it, as opposed to a lot of the kids that came later,
Yeah.
that just got into it was a whole different kind of kids. We were pretty young and innocent and straight shooters. Everybody kind of went back to Ohio and San Diego and became lawyers and nurses and have grandchildren. It was really kind of interesting to me.
Well, that ran for quite a time on
Broadway.
Broadway.
It ran for about 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
but it was, as I say, we were all 12 or 13 years old. It was everybody's first show.
Well, that was remarkable, starting your career in that way. And then, of course, as you said, West Side Story led directly to the wonderful television series Hullabaloo. Tell the listeners a little bit about this. This really was before its time, kind of a mixture of several of the variety shows of that time. But
yeah, well, there was Shindig and American Bandstand, but they were pretty amateur kind of rock and roll shows.
Feel that beat coming strong. Feel like you wanna come along and jump for joy. We're telling you it's Hullabaloo.
The producer, Gary Smith, was a very big producer at NBC, and he wanted to put together a little bit something more like cross between Ed Sullivan, Hollywood Palace, and American Bandstand, so we used to call it the Icebox Show because while the Rolling Stones were on, all the parents were in the Icebox, and then they'd have Sarah Vaughan or Nina Simone or something like that on the same show with, the Turtles or something. So there was something for everybody, but It was a very polished NBC, very professional kind of show, and we were all very professional dancers. We were all from Broadway. This is a little step up, I think.
Yeah, 1965, and your part in that series was remarkable. Tell how you were presented, your part as the featured dancer in the cage.
We were all pretty much featured dancers. There was about 6 or 7 of us that were, as I say, really the top of our game dancers. We all had great reputations in New York and everything. But one day they had Johnny Rivers, who, this is like in the first couple of weeks, and I don't know if you remember him. He had that one hit, Secret Agent Man.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And well, his father or something owned this pretty seedy, wild club called the Whiskey on Sunset. He had young Johnny as a singer, as a lounge singer. So he had this big hit. And quite frankly, the producers didn't know what to do with him because he couldn't really sing or dance that much. And they wanted to make a production number of it. So somebody had decided to restruct the actual club, the Whiskey. And in the Whiskey, they had a girl, I think it was at the end of the bar, actually, in a cage. But since it was a family show, they built this huge, tall tower with a cage. And I remember the choreographer saying, well, we need somebody to go up there, and nobody wanted to go. And then they mentioned extra pay, and I raised my hand almost immediately and got right up there. And so I did it one time, and they put a fringe dress and some white boots on me, and that was the end of it. They struck it down. That was no more to be done. And then NBC got just inundated with thousands of, in those days, that was a big deal, of sacks of letters singing, "Bring Back Girl in the Cage." So it became a weekly phenomenon.
You really...
Much to my mother's dismay, because, all those ballet lessons,
Yeah.
I got to be known pretty well nationwide. I was on the cover of TV Guide. I did the Carson Show a few times as the girl in the cage. And, and when you're 17, that's the greatest. I mean, I was at the top of the world. I'm in high school. I'm hanging out with the Beatles. I'm on the cover of TV Guide. But I really had a hard time getting taken seriously after that, as far as acting or anything else. Everybody saw the girl in the cage. I was a go-go girl.
That brings up another point. It's because of your role there as the go-go girl in the cage, that go-go dance and the whole movement, it exploded because of you.
Well, yeah, it kind of did. This is interesting. There was a New York Times article about me in the Sunday Times last week in the sports section. And so some professor, I can't remember her name, sent me an email, which I'm going to take and frame, because I had no idea how important I was to the culture of women's liberation, because she said she is doing a whole thesis, and apparently she's said that a few professors have actually... I've been the discussion of how the girl in the cage sort of changed the 60s as far as the women movement went, and I went, no. Now, see, now my mother would have really been proud of that. She's doing a whole book, and she has all these... She's a Harvard... She teaches at Harvard and all that, and she's coming in February to interview me, and I'm very taken with myself now.
I bet. Well, you mentioned the whiskey go-go, and that was the hot spot.
Well, it wasn't when we did the show. It kind of had a bad connotation, and we put that on the map, and they kind of put us on the map. It was kind of one hand washed the other, and this whole go-go cage thing became a huge thing. And obviously when we did it, it was very innocent. I was 17 with a long fringe dress on and quite covered. And then within a year, every strip bar in Times Square and all over the United States, the connotation went to, topless go-go girls. It took a nasty turn.
It took a turn, yes.
It did, because it was an excuse for all these bars that were topless to kind of get away with, go-go girl.
Yeah.
And needless to say, my mother never got over it.
Well, I was going to mention the fact that you did put the Whiskey Go-Go on the map, and, a lot of great groups were founded there. Of course, the Doors were the house band along with Buffalo Springfield, and we had a member of Buffalo Springfield on our show just not too long ago. And that brings me to another point, because you mentioned that you had a chance to meet a lot of the great groups that came on that show, including
just about every single one of them.
The Beatles, and you were very close to the Beatles.
Well, the Beatles weren't on the show. They were the only group that wasn't on the show. Actually, the Beatles came over right before Hullabaloo started. And at the time, I was writing a gossip column for a very big magazine at the time called The Hit Parader, which, I've often thought if somebody was smart enough to come out and publish that again, they do very well. The Hit Parader was kind of a cross between like a teenage, Us magazine, and it also published all the words to all the top 30 songs. It was a huge magazine, very popular, and I wrote this gossip column, and because of that, I had these press credentials, and I happened to be at the airport when the Beatles came right off and stood right next to me, and they didn't know who I was, and I really, quite honestly, wasn't sure who they were, because nobody had seen them perform yet. They hadn't done the Ed Sullivan Show. So they're I have this great picture of me and them. Literally, I'm the first person to sit and talk to them. And they're looking at me like, who are you? And I'm kind of looking back at them like, I don't know who you are either, but they were terrific. And because I had that kind of instant access, and they couldn't have been nicer, we spent some time together. We hung out. I got to go with them when they went to the Plaza Hotel, and we all sat around there. Their manager was there and everything. But then, of course, as soon as the Ed Sullivan Show came on, nobody could get near him with you'd have to be in the CIA to get near him. But for that first week, everybody was hanging out and couldn't have been nicer.
Well, that's great. That show also led to a lot of other things. One of the things that you did later was working at the Hollywood Palace.
When the Watusi and the Swim and all those other silly dances started getting popular, I said to myself, I talk to me all the time, I said, Phyllis, there is nothing those kids can do that you can't do. So I went to a place on Sunset Strip called Whiskey a Go-Go. I had 2 whiskeys and fell on my go-go. But there's a beautiful young lady here tonight who knows how to do all those dances so beautifully you are not ready. Try to get ready. You probably enjoyed her as much as I did when she starred on Hullabaloo, and she's with us in the Hollywood Palace tonight. Welcome her now, Lada Edmund Jr.
When Hullabaloo was over, I did Hollywood Palace, the Ed Sullivan Show, and I did a lot of those things.
Even appeared on a game show.
California. Yeah, well, that was infamous.
The dating game.
The dating game, yeah. That was infamous because Chuck Berry was the producer, who I think to this day, and he hears my name, he probably goes into some sort of a trauma, because I was about 17 or whatever it was, and I picked this guy, and we won a trip to Russia. And in those days, nobody had been to Russia. And none of us got along. Guy and I didn't get along. The woman that went there to protect us didn't particularly like either one of us, and so we were all sequestered into this hotel where nobody was really speaking to each other. And in those days, they had this thing called in-tourist. You couldn't even go 5 feet out the door without a guard with you. You had to check in at the hotel. On each floor, there was a guard. It was really lockdown. And so I met an exchange student from Minnesota, from my old neighborhood, and he said, hey, you want to escape and go over to the university, and I'll sneak you in. And I said, that's great, because when you're 17, you are a moron that way. And he snuck me into the university. I was climbing over a wall, and I got caught.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. And I had a New York City bus pass. I had my Los Angeles library card. and this big blonde with, a big white fur coat. I stuck out. And to make a long story short, everything I had was confiscated. They sent my date and my woman back to Chuck, and I had to stay there in the embassy for a week while they made sure I wasn't a spy. It was quite a little
Pretty
incident,
wild.
quite a little international incident.
Yeah, that's great.
It was an adventure, and when you're that age, you don't care that you're causing an international incident. The producer, though, he sent this little girl to Russia to come there for 3 days or 4 days and come back, and the next thing he knows, I'm being held there for espionage. So,
That's pretty wild.
yeah, that was the last time I ever worked for him.
I wanted to touch briefly on your film career. You made quite a few pictures along the way. Your popularity was just huge, in the late 60s and so on. And one of the better ones was a movie called Out of It.
Yeah, that was John Voight's first movie.
John Voight, and I was going to mention that. This actually was a very well put together movie.
It actually won. It was like one of these small little independent movies. The guy that produced it was Edward Pressman, who his parents owned Pressman Toys, which is a very big, Chinese checkers and all that. That's all Pressman Toys. Anyway, it was an independent film that he and his college roommate wrote and produced, and it won all kinds of awards. And it was a very, very sweet, small little film, and it was a great experience for me. And as I say, it was John Voight's first film. In the archives, a lot of people, rent it. It's kind of a cult film, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
He is president of the senior class, a straight A student, head of the debating team. He has his own car, his own boat. With all this going for him, what more could he want? This is Lada Edmund Jr. With all this going for her, what more could she want? This is John Voight.
What's Megan?
All he has going for him is football and Lada Edmund Jr. Both of them want her.
You went swimming with my girl this morning, right?
Yeah, what about it?
I'm gonna burn your jacket. That's what's about it.
Only one can have her. The other will end up out of it. And when you're out of it, you're desperate.
Is that thing loaded? Hey, this is no joke, Green. Fooling around with a loaded weapon before a scrimmage.
And of course, a lot of television work along the way. But I
decided to be a stunt driver instead of an actress.
That's right. You moved into stunt work, and I found this very fascinating. As a matter of fact, one of the films with Burt Reynolds. Tell the listeners a little bit about that.
I did most of Burt Reynolds movies. Smokey and the Bandit, Hooper, all of them. So he was a great guy to work for and very loyal. If you worked good for him and showed up and did your job, you always had a job with him.
Well, the Smokey and the Bandit, the one of the scenes that people remember when it comes to stunt work was the jumping of that bridge, and you were actually in that car when that happened.
Yeah, we jumped the Trans Am. We had a rocket engine put in the back. We went from about 0 to 70 miles an hour in 1 second. It was the same rocket engine that was designed for the Snake River jump with Evel Knievel. You remember that motorcycle jump for the Grand Canyon that he did? But people forget he didn't make it.
He didn't make it. Thank goodness he had a parachute,
people forget about Evel Knievel. Very nice guy, but almost every of the big hikes, like the Caesar's Palace jump and everything, he never made it. Never made any of them. Now, his son, on the other hand, is probably one of the greatest stunt drivers ever.
Oh, absolutely.
But Evel Knievel, all the hikes and everything, people forget the actual outcome of these. He crashed and burned in every single one of them.
That's what he's known for, his crashes.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, another movie you made with Burt Reynolds, Cannonball Run, I briefly mentioned it. You were not able to actually do that stunt, and the person that replaced you was paralyzed for life doing that stunt that you were scheduled for.
From the shoulders down.
Yeah.
She was sitting in the passenger seat. I had to go back to New York. I had just had a baby 6 months before, and my baby had measles, and we were running over, and the director and producer said, "Well, look, listen, you're just going to be sitting in the passenger seat. The stuntman's girlfriend is one of these hot dog skiers. Beautiful girl, Heidi. I can't remember her last name. And all she's going to do is sit in the passenger seat, and there, but for the grace of God." And she was like 19 or 20 years old.
Yeah. Just a
and that's
sad
when
thing.
I started deciding, time to reinvent myself. I'll be a mother for a few years.
Now, you were the first person to actually test the airbag. Is that true?
Airbag, yep. No, me and Hal Needham. Actually, Hal Needham was the director for Cannonball Run. We were the first human dummies, as they say, to test the airbag. If it wasn't for us, there'd be no airbag.
Actually injured doing that.
Yep. Oh, yeah. We took that car into a 44-ton brick wall at the equivalent of about 120 miles an hour.
Oh, my goodness.
Believe me, if that bag hadn't gone off, we'd have been wearing that hood ornament for a hat.
But that led directly to you actually going before Congress and urging that the American automakers install airbags.
Well, yeah, Allstate is, we were paid by Allstate, which was a subsidiary of Eaton Industries. And it was like 1974 or 5, I think. And the criminal thing is that Volvo and Mercedes had already had it in their cars in Europe for over a year and a half. And all our car companies, Chrysler, Ford, every one of them, they knew that they were going to have to get it. It was just a matter of retooling. But they weren't ready to retool. Car companies retool about every 7 years, meaning their whole line. And they fought it, which is criminal. You'd be surprised how many people who don't wear a seatbelt or just wearing seatbelts, little tiny crashes, 20 miles an hour, little fender benders, and their faces and everything, just destroyed. And so we went to talk to the head of the transportation through 2 different presidents, actually, and saying, listen, this is ready. It's ready to go. You need to be doing it. Obviously, Allstate sponsored us because they wanted to have them in the cars. And I remember Lee Iacocca and everybody else, all these heads of companies up there saying, what if your grandmother's riding in the car and it goes off by accident and she swerves? It was all a lot of hooey.
Yeah, you hear those stories.
They were stalling.
Yeah.
And sure enough, a couple years later, when it was time to retool, that's when the United States got the airbag. And then I found out that all the time that they were fighting us in Congress, the head of these car companies had them in their personal family cars. Boy, I would have loved to know that piece of information. Ralph Nader told us that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Years later, he found that out, that Lee Iacocca, all these people, had them in their own family cars while they are testifying that, the United States isn't ready to have it yet.
Well, America can be grateful for your work in that area. We're a lot safer because of that.
I got paid really well.
Well,
I made $25,000 to go down that wall one time, and at the time I probably would have just pedaled it down towards the wall for that. I didn't do it because I was, Mother Teresa. I did it because it was something, a unique situation. But it was only afterwards.
It opened your eyes. It really did, yeah.
Because when I realized that, the way things work, bureaucracy, that's when I decided, it was just, you can't fight City Hall.
Well, I want to talk about some of the stuff you're doing now. You have become a personal trainer now, and also you're involved in charity. You donate time.
Well, I have a company called Minor Miracles, and I do a lot of personal training, but I'm really kind of pushing towards, which I have been for the last 4 years, children and obesity. And obesity now does not mean you're so huge you can't get through the door. Obesity, especially for children, is an epidemic thing where, you have 3 or 4-year-olds that can't even walk. They're so heavy and their joints are, diabetes and all of this stuff. It's an epidemic. And as you know, Michelle Obama is fighting it and everything with the food and all that. But it's, as a matter of fact, I'm hoping, I train a lot of kids, and I'm hoping to get a grant I'm trying to do now, put together, because I'd like to open up a school, almost like, how, remember when gyms used to be called clubs?
That's right. I remember that, yes.
Right. Well, that's the old days, but a kind of a club for kids that, and there's a huge need for that in rural areas, city areas, where after school now, these kids are a lot of latchkey kids. And they don't go to play soccer because there's nobody to drive them anywhere. And this is even in affluent neighborhoods. So, because you have 2 working parents or something. And I would love to have a gym where we would pick them up after school, have senior citizens help them with their homework, do karate, do training, nutritional counseling, and then the parents can pick them up later. But kind of a club where kids could go and be healthy.
That's wonderful. It really is.
There's a need for that, and it's kind of after school care, but it's geared towards, getting kids to move their butts, which doesn't happen. And these kids are sharp as a tack. They're all computer savvy, but they don't move.
When I was a kid, and when you were a kid, we were outside all the time playing, Kids don't
go outside anymore.
No, they don't.
No, and well, it's not just the kids. I mean, I do seminars for a lot of corporations, businesses, and I say what's happened is we've taken people out of the factories and the farms and put them behind a computer. And I have clients who could but don't. They fax out their lunch. Yeah. They don't even want to walk out to lunch.
Yeah.
We don't get up to turn the TV anymore. And you say, well, that's not such a big deal. But at the end of the day, we haven't moved much. And our eating habits are terrible. And without sounding like one of these, zealots, because I'm certainly not. But, you have to move. That's how we were built. That's what we're meant to do. And you don't have to, run the mile or, have your tongue hanging out on the treadmill, but you've got to be consistently moving. And at the end of the day, we don't move anymore.
Well, it's great that you have this program, this idea, and the fact that you're helping in that area, and it's great to hear. Do you have a website or something that people can find out a little bit more about you?
I do. It's LadaSt.com. Nothing fancy.
Okay.
Just my name. And as I say, as we're going along, we're rebuilding it because I'm really going after these grants, and I'm just thrilled to see that. I think it's a lot to do with Michelle Obama, but there's a lot of grants now coming for just this kind of a situation because it's so epidemic.
And one more thing before we go. Now, this is just rumors, but I heard there's a chance that there will be a reunion with all the cast members of Hullabaloo. Is that true?
That's what they keep telling me. Channel 13 has been trying to put this together for a while, or I don't know in Oregon if it's 13, but it's the public
PBS
station.
Yes. Yeah.
But listen, there's reunions for everything.
Yeah, that's true.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Well,
I'm just getting over the 50th year. I'm telling you, that was an eye-opener.
The Bye Bye Birdie one. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, my God.
Well, that's great. Well, you know what? It's been fun talking with you. I really have enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it.
Well, Lada, again, I thank you, and I encourage all the listeners to check out your website. Just a great site to go to, and I really appreciate you taking this time with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.